Hey peeps, my name is Sarah, and today in this video we are going to look at some of the techniques that I use to photobash in Procreate in order to create this piece. Now, photobashing is also known as like photomanipulation, photocompositing, sometimes matte painting. My definition is basically just anything that requires the use of multiple photos and digital painting techniques. So the main techniques that I'm going to focus on in this video on how to use curves to blend photos and colors together, and I'm also going to cover just two different methods of how I remove backgrounds from the photos, and I'm also going to kind of show you how I use digital painting to tie it all together. Also, make sure you stay till the end because I have a special gift for you guys. Before we begin, if you're new here, I'm an artist who likes to dabble in traditional and digital art. So if you like learning about a variety of art mediums and you like what you see, consider hitting that subscribe button. Okay, so let's jump in. First of all, if you need to source some really awesome stock photos, you can go one of two routes. So you can either go the free resource route. I personally love using Unsplash, but occasionally I will use like Pixabay, and I know there's a few others. But I don't use them because I can usually figure out something using those two sources instead. You can also go the paid route and use something like Envato, or I think Shutterstock is another big one. I can't personally recommend either of them just because I have not used them. But what I can tell you is if you go the free route, you could spend up to 3 or 4 times longer sourcing photos just because it's harder to find things that work together, whereas if you were to use like a paid service like Shutterstock or Envato, that a lot of times the stuff is already cut out, or there's just a lot of demand for certain things, so there's just more available to you if you go the paid route. Now, because I rely so heavily on free resources, I take a different approach when looking for inspiration for photos, and I like to search for my subject first, and then when I find a stock photo that I really like, then I'll just kind of build everything around it. So I have a selection of images that I've found, but they're all kind of centered around this one image of an ibex, and I had this idea of sort of like a colossus looking creature that looks like he's like kind of in a part of the landscape. So I probably won't use all of these photos, but I like to have some options. So a lot of these will just be textures to fill in the ibex a little bit more and just kind of make everything fit together like a puzzle. So I'm going to start with the background and build my way to the foreground, but first I'm going to move all my images onto the canvas and do just kind of a rough cut, just so I can see how everything is going to lay compositionally. I start putting my clouds in, and anytime I have images with more like a feathered kind of edge to it, I like to play around with different layer modes. So because cutting out clouds is, like, first, it's time consuming, and second, it's hard to make sure that it doesn't look like it's been cut out. We want everything to blend together as seamlessly as possible. So sometimes I need to play with lighting and desaturate it, and then add a little bit of colors back with the color balance feature to match the sky. And then I'll take a really large soft edge brush and just erase as much of the background as I can, because I want to see the stars of that sky coming through the clouds. Now I just need to color match all of my pieces together, and I will do that in 2 different ways. So my first method is just by matching the color using color balance. You can use the sliders and the control of the amount of cyan to red, green to magenta, yellow to blue, and you can also adjust your highlights and midtones and shadows separately, so you can have more warmer highlights but then turn around and have kind of cooler shadows. After that, I'm just going to go back and fix the brightness and saturation, because the color balance does tend to mess with your values a little bit, and then it also tends to kind of oversaturate the colors. Now the other method I use is curves. Now at first I really did not like curves, but I'm kind of getting used to it, and so it's kind of okay now. Now the advantage of using curves is that I can adjust color and brightness all in one screen. I don't have to go back and forth. But let's just take a closer look at how curves actually work, because it can be a little bit confusing. So if you'll look, the left side will control your dark values, and the right side controls the lights, and all the other values kind of fall somewhere in the middle of this scale from black to white. By moving the farthest left point up, I can lighten all of my values, and on the right side, if I bring this point down, I can make all my highlights a little bit darker, and it all kind of making the contrast a bit more subdued this way, which is perfect for nighttime scenes, honestly. Now, if you move the left-hand slider slightly to the right, then all of those darker values now become my darkest darks. So it's almost like you're losing kind of the left-hand side of your mid-tones. And same thing for the right hand. If I move it to the left, I can make those lighter mid-tones now become my brightest whites. So now I'm unfamiliar with the actual curves portion, but you can bend this curve to create some different lighting scenarios. You can also add other points to make it even more complex. I've tried to play with this, but it just never quite produces something that I like. But I will keep trying it, and I will keep playing with it until it produces something I like. So that is kind of your black to white scale. We can also take this and edit our colors as well. And it pretty much works the same way, but instead it is separated into the red, green, and blues. And it works similarly to the color balance in that you're controlling, when you're controlling the reds, it goes from red to cyan, green to magenta, blue to yellow. And think of any point that's placed down in this region will be yellow, and any region placed, or any point placed in this region up here will be blue. And you're going to kind of control all your values in your image with this one curve. So that's curves kind of in a nutshell. And I still usually end up playing with kind of the hue, saturation, and brightness just to make sure that I have it fine-tuned to what I want. So I will go through all of the pieces I want to add and just adjust them with either the color balance or the curves feature so that they all have similar lighting and a similar color. You can adjust the lighting to some degree later on, but it's best to start out with images that have a similar lighting scheme anyways, though I personally find it easier to work light images to be darker rather than the other way around. Okay, so now let's add in some more elements. Now we really kind of get into cutting out our images. I'm going to arrange this tree so that it looks like his horns are actually part of the tree. So I make my image slightly transparent and then place it so that I know how much I need to cut out. Now, one thing that's really annoying about Procreate is if you run your image off the side of the canvas, you will lose those pixels. You can't just like slide your image back and have the whole picture back. So be careful when you're placing your objects. Now, cutting this out is a bit of a pain, and you can, like I said earlier, purchase stock images where something like a tree would already be cut out, and then you can just slap it on there and whatnot, but we are using free resources, so we're cutting it out by hand. So I used two different methods to cut out objects. So I have tried a few different background removers, and they might work okay if you have like a really clean background, but if you do, there will still be quite a bit of cleanup. So for something like this, as much as I dread the process, I kind of just roll up my sleeves and take out the eraser brush for most of it. Now for some areas, I will use the selection tool, but it can be a little finicky in Procreate. Basically, you can choose between different settings. You can use automatic, freehand, rectangle, or ellipse. You could use freehand, but at that point, I would rather just use my eraser. So with the automatic selection, you can tap an area and slide from right to left to change the threshold, which basically just grabs a higher range of values around where you just tapped. There is also the ability to add selections when you tap other regions. You can also invert the selection. So if it's easier to grab the object rather than the background, then you would just invert it when you go to erase it. So now we have all of these little pockets like this. I recommend just doing a little bit at a time. So select a few regions, then select your eraser tool and erase those bits, go back and select some more pieces. Now, this is faster, but I'm going to show you a side-by-side comparison here. So this is usually where I can pick out the Photoshop pros. This first picture, using the automatic selection, you can see there's almost like an outline of the background that's still there. And the second one is where I use just the eraser brush because I have more control of how much background I am actually removing. So one may seem easier, but I still have to do a bit of cleanup. So is it really that much faster? Now, are you going to get everything, like every bit of background? No. Not with something like this anyways. And you don't have to be like a background Nazi either. If people are going to zoom way in just to look and see if you removed all the background from your images, they probably need a new hobby. Anyways, I like to cut out all of my images before correcting the colors so that it's easier to just spot where the background is. You could also just turn off all the layers and just have like a neutral gray background while you cut. But I like to see how it's all going to blend together as I cut it out. So to blend the tree into the horns, I did a couple different things. I have a layer mask to fade out the horns and a layer mask to fade out the base of the tree. Then I add another layer on top of the horns, just of the horns, and use that layer to blend, like to get a blend mode to get the texture from the horns on top of the tree trunk. Now this is where we're really getting into the fun stuff. I'm going to start adding some landscapes and textures to the ibex to make him look more like he's part of the landscape. So the first thing is to cut it out, and then we will just kind of adjust the colors to match. I really like how he just kind of had this like kind of springy mane on him, so I want to use the mountains and the pine trees to just kind of reflect that shape and that texture. Then I did a little bit of blending out on the tree branches because it was just looking a little too sharp compared to the rest of it. So now I'm going to add it in this vine covered doorway because I just thought it looked really cool. And we're going to really bring out those vines later on so that they pop. Now I'm going to bring in my waterfall just for a fun element to break up all of that dark value. And I don't cover up all of the fur texture from the original photo of the ibex just because I think it does add a little bit of almost like a brush look to it. Now I'm going to bring in some rock textures for the face because I think that will be the easiest way to bring out some of the features like the eye and the nose, and even with that white stripe marking on the face. The real challenge here is we want it to look a bit like an ibex. That's why it's photo manipulation. Really, you want to blend things together rather than just slapping images together. So it's like you need both the landscape aspect and the animal aspect to be both recognizable. So the first thing is just to get those textures down, and I will bring it out even more when I paint over top. So I actually put the face over top as a blend mode so that I can see where those markings are, and I'm gonna start painting now. And really what I'm doing is just accenting different things that are already there that also correlate with the ibex underneath. So wherever the white markings are, I'm gonna just paint ridges over top to make it look like that black marking is just a big crevice in the front of his face. So I do have to be a little creative around the eye and the ear, but I can still pull it all together if I make the painted textures consistent across all of my images. Then we go into the vines and we do the same thing. Pro tip here, if you are spending a lot of time zoomed in, make sure that you zoom out just to see if people can really actually see the details you're putting into it. Now, this is my favorite part because we really just get to see the whole piece come together. Drawing eyes is always kind of fun just because I wanted it to look like it was glowing a little bit. So I'm going to just lay down some color, blur it out, and then add in my bright spots. Then the glowing can be a fun aspect so that I can use some rim lighting and bounce light to further define the rock textures just outside of it. As I zoomed out, I kind of was looking at the snow-capped mountains along his backline, and they were just a tad too distracting, and it threw off the depth a little bit. So I want them to be a bit more subtle and make it look like it was generally on kind of the same plane. Because right now it kind of looks like, well, you've got the trees, and then it looks like miles back is more mountains. So I just wanted it to be more closer together. I'm gonna add some splashes around the waterfall real quick, and we will be adding in some water later. Now I'm going through and I'm adding some twigs back into the tree because it's actually faster to draw some of those little ones instead of cutting each one out. So I just chopped them right off so that everything would look a bit more consistent. From here, I'm just going to go throughout and paint in things to pull the whole piece together. So I'm switching back and forth between adding highlights and some shadows, and at first I couldn't really decide if I wanted the ground to just look foggy or if I actually wanted water. But in the end, I did go for more of a water look with some mist sitting on top of it. So to do that, really all I had to do was just draw some water lines around kind of where it would touch the ground. Then I use a soft brush to make that kind of misty look. I did put some mist more into the background so that we got some more depth. Then I added some more fog over top, adding in some more highlights to the foreground. Then Procreate has some very nice brushes for painting leaves, so I went ahead and I just put leaves on the tree and have some brighter leaves kind of falling off. And then once we get our kind of final tweaking here and there, we're pretty much done. So that's kind of just a brief overview of how I created this piece. So if you have stayed this far, first of all, let me just say thank you for watching the video this far. And I have a special gift for you. This image is actually available as a phone wallpaper. So I actually have it set on mine. So if you check out the link in the description, you can just enter in your email and the file will pop up and you can download it right there. That's it for now, peeps, and I will see you in the next video.